We're live. I'm doing another interview and I'm in my son's room now, folks. And instead of bringing Brian up, we're going to get right into it because I know he has stuff to do. So we're going to start talking right away. I'm really pleased to have Brian Hicks with me. Brian is a Chicago area comic that has been doing it for years. And he's got a really great album on Spotify that I listened to that I can't remember the name of. But yeah,
Dibs?
Dips. Yeah. I listened to that a couple times through while I was driving and really liked it. And I do want to talk about that a little bit because there was some interesting parts in there that you wouldn't normally hear on a comedy album. Also, Brian's got a dry bar special that just came out in May that is really, really good. And I want to talk about dry bar a little bit. Thanks for being on the show, Brian. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thanks for having me. I was very excited when you reached out, and I was looking forward to it. So this is great.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to talk about, the reason why I reached out to you was because I re-listened to an interview I did with Michael Palisak, who's one of my favorite comics, and he was on the last, I think the last season of Last Comic Standing. Him and Ian Bagg, and I talked to both of them at different times, but I really enjoy his style of comedy. It's a little out there, but super squeaky clean, obviously, and I just really like his point of view. But one of the things I asked him, because he really came up in Chicago and did a lot of work there at Zany's, I asked him who were the comics that were influential to him and also helped him along the way. And he mentioned you, and then he mentioned a couple other comics, and then he mentioned you again. So you obviously stuck out as somebody who was not just another comic vying for stage time, but somebody who actually helped him out. And he really appreciated that. So one of the things that I ask comics about what they've learned from comics who have helped them out is I ask them that what have they learned and what do you gain from it? So one of the things I wanted to ask you, being the veteran comic and being the helper comic, who instead of saying you little shits get out of my yard, you were actually nice and helpful and obviously made an impact. Not only on Michael, but a lot of different people. What do you gain from that? Because there's got to be a two-way street, and I'm wondering what you gain from being a good guy to other comics.
Yeah, sure. So it's funny you say that and mention other comics because I've been doing it for over 20 years, and I'll run into people now who will say, "Hey, I worked with you 10 years ago when I started," and the memory only is so good. I met him once or something like that. So my first question to everybody is, well, was I nice to you? That's always the first thing I want to know.
Yeah.
And so far the answer has been unanimously, yes, I have been nice to them. In Mike's case, I think, I was relatively new to comedy. I think when I first met Mike, I was maybe 3 or 4 years into it, maybe 5 years. And so it was all really new and it was fresh to me. And there were a lot of lessons that I learned in those, 4 or 5 years that I thought were really, really good, especially coming from somebody who just started. So passing that on to Mike, who I thought was incredibly funny right out of the box and young. And it's easy to have that mindset. Hey, good here, move on, go find somewhere else to do it. But I've always really been a fan of comedy. Before I even became a comedian, I used to go to the comedy club probably 2 or 3 times a month. And my family growing up in that atmosphere, it was always, one-upping the other one at the dinner table. So I've always been a fan of comedy. And I think first and foremost, if you have that mentality, then it's easy to want to see people who are funny succeed and help them. Mike was funny, so I didn't help him write jokes or anything like that. I just kind of gave him some advice on some of the other things as we went along.
Right, like booking and actually getting paid and things like that.
And I was probably, as you mentioned, I'm kind of borderline. PG. I can go a little harder PG if I want to. I can go a little cleaner if I want to too. Mike was always clean, and I think he probably asked me about that. And my advice was always write clean if you can, because obviously it's a lot easier to write dirty jokes, but you're going to get more work by doing clean sets, because headliners or features or whoever's going to bring you on the road with them, they prefer you're cleaner than dirtier, and you're going to get a lot more work if you work cleaner. So that was always my mindset, and that was definitely one of the pieces of advice I gave to anybody who was willing to ask me for it. I'm like, well, write clean if you can, just because you're definitely going to get more work out of it, and more people see you, and then they're willing to take you on the road with them, because they know where the show could go from there, opposed to it starts dirty and then there's really only one way you can go with it.
Right. Do you feel like you've gained anything by being a nice guy rather than being the either standoffish or just like get out of my yard type guy?
Yeah, I absolutely believe in karma, and the nicer I am to people, it just seems more opportunities come my way. And it's easy as a comic to always compare with other people, and oh, look at that guy's doing that and he's doing that, but I'm sure at the same time they're probably looking at some of the things I'm doing, and they're saying, hey, look at Brian, he's doing that and he's doing that. So I've been pretty fortunate of people who've helped me along the way too. You ask, why did I do it? It's because that's how I got to where I was. I got more work from people bringing me along with them to do a club for the first time, and then obviously it's on you. You have to do well, and then two, after that, it's on you to get rebooked there. You got to follow up. So I didn't rely on one guy to take me everywhere, and then when he was going back out on the road, be like, hey, can you take me again? It was on me to do a good job, and then obviously follow up and make the connections and the contacts.
Right. It's funny. I've been in sales since I had hair, and the one book I read so many sales books, but one book I read that totally changed my life, not necessarily just in sales, but my life in general. It's called The Go Giver. And what it is, it's about this sales guy that, sales can be a lot of quid pro quo. You do this for me and I'll do this for you. Sure. And the guy, this is almost written like a fable. And the guy in this book just gave and gave and gave. He would consult, he would give people, stuff that is worth money to other consultants, and it would always turn around that he got a bunch of business because of it. Sure. But he didn't always get the business from the people that he helped. It was sometimes he'd get referrals and stuff and things like that. And I've really taken that to heart and understood the fact, without getting bitter, that you can give a lot and you don't necessarily get back from the people you give to sometimes. Sure. But just being open to the giving makes you more open to receiving, and people tend to gravitate towards you because of that. And I know that's really super hippy dippy stuff, but since I've adopted it, it's really changed my life. And I feel like that because of that, I get more opportunity. When I reach out to people like you just say yes, and I don't have to answer a ton of questions about what my podcast is about and stuff like that. So I just feel like it's really helpful to be a giving type of person, rather than one of those people that is either quid pro quo or just closes themselves off totally.
Yeah. And you know what? It also works both ways too. So you have to be willing to receive that information. And I truly remember Mike as being somebody who wanted to learn how to do it, what to do in situations, and how to handle himself. So you really have to be open to that, to be able to take the advice, because there's definitely been times where I've offered advice when it wasn't asked of me, and I can usually see the expression on the person's face. They're looking at me like, why are you telling me this? Yeah. And I guess because I'm like, whoa, in my mind, I'm like, because I think you're good, and I think I can help you, things that I had to learn going along. But at the same time, I tend to wait until somebody asks me now before I give advice. because sometimes it could be construed the wrong way, and they think I'm being preachy or I'm above them, and I'm certainly not. It's everything I tell somebody is to help the situation if possible. But if they're not open, then they're not open. I don't hold grudges or anything. Even when you give somebody, if you're standing in the back of the room, you hear a joke and you think of a good line for somebody. I'm very really weary about that as well. So I always try to say, hey, I heard you do this joke and I thought about this line. And then I always go after and say, hey, if you want to use it, great. And if you don't, you're not going to hurt my feelings or anything, because some people, they accept stuff like that. And some people, they really don't want any part of it.
Right. And those people just aren't ready for it yet. I think at some time they will be. So, being a veteran like you are, 20 plus years, and when you met Michael, it was 3, 4, 5 years in. At what point did you say, hey, I'm going to do this and this is going to be my career?
Well, honestly, the first time I ever so where I got my start was I worked at a comedy club. The comedy club that I used to go to all the time. Something happened in my life where it changed things a little bit, and then I had some free time, and I got a job at the comedy club working as a doorman. I became the floor manager, working the lights, the sound, and everything. So I was a big fan of comedy. I used to have a very good exchange with comedians as they'd come through, always very friendly, and always admired them. I mean, really. And there were a few occasions where they would say, hey, you want to be a comedian, as we would go back and forth and joke. And I never thought that for anything, because standing up there in a room full of 300 people just by yourself, I couldn't even imagine what that was, right? There was nothing I wanted. I didn't want any piece of that. But something happened, and the wait staff had talked me into going up one night. So I prepared. It was about 2 weeks, and I wrote some jokes, and I went on stage for the first time. It was a Saturday night late show. And I just remember I was up there, I don't know, 12 minutes or something, which is probably unheard of for your first time on stage.
Yeah.
But I just remember walking off thinking, I got to figure out how to get back up here again. Like, I hadn't planned past that day, but as I was up there and enjoying it, I was walking off thinking, well, I've got to do this again. So I think that was really the point where I'm like, I can do this, and the being afraid I was a target up there kind of got out of my head a little bit. There were still some times where I would go up there and somebody would yell something and I'd pad, early on. But once I started getting some laughs and stuff, I thought, well, I can really do this. So that's what kind of inspired me to just look more into it.
So thinking about when you were, okay, I'm full-time comedian now. Did you start working like with an agency to get booked, or did you go out and do all that on your own?
So the good part of being in Chicago is, I think if you are looking to be a working comedian, I think the Midwest is where you want to live. If you're looking to be discovered, if you're looking to act, if you're looking to do anything else, then definitely go to LA, go to New York. But if you want to work as a working comedian, the Midwest is I mean, there is so much around here. I mean, when I started, there were 3 different Zanies local, and more clubs started adding on. So I got in good with most of the local clubs and started doing sets at all them. And then there was a booking agency in Michigan that I started doing work for, and they had quite a bit of work. And it was all 1, 2, 3 one-nighters in a row, and they would link them together. So I've never had any representation, but I've made some incredible contacts over the years with some people who've booked multiple things. And so that's kind of what I've done to support it. And, luckily I've done pretty well and been able to fill a calendar for a good amount of time now.
Yeah. And I do want to compliment you on your website and your calendar, because it's actually up to date. And
I agree.
I go to a lot of comedians' websites, and I'm seeing 2016 stuff there. And
that is one thing that when I first, it's funny you say that, because when I first got, excuse me, when I first got a website, my friend made it for me, And any dates I got, I'd have to call him up and he'd have to add them in. And I became a nuisance to the guy, because obviously it was important to me. It wasn't that important to him. He was doing it for free, so I couldn't complain. So when I figured out a way to create my own website, that was the one promise I made to myself. I'm like, the calendar will always be updated. There won't be any discrepancies or anything. So a lot of times people will be like, "Are you open?" And I'm thinking, just look at my website. I mean, that'll pretty much tell you if I'm available or not, because I really do keep it up to date. So thanks.
Yeah, you are kind of a unicorn in that respect, because there's not many that are. And the funny thing is you get a fan base, and I know you have a fan base, and they want to know where you're at and when they can see you. And I'm sure the easiest thing to do is go to your website and look. And guess what? They know where you're at.
Yeah, that's what I tell everybody. They're like, where are you going to be? And I'm like, go to my website. That's all. I don't know where I'm going to be next week, but my website.
Now, thinking about your style of comedy, because I mean, you do mix it up a little bit. There's the family stuff. There's, a little bit of observational, and there's some misdirects and things like that. You kind of put it all together so it goes into a cohesive hour, I personally think that's difficult because I am starting to, I made a decision. It's funny. I just talked to Todd Glass last week about it, and I told him I don't want to make this podcast about me, but I've decided that since I'm moving 550 miles south, and I'm a new comedian where I'm at, I want to change it up a little bit, and I'm still going to be as clean as clean can be. I don't utter a 4-letter word ever in my set, even though I cuss like a sailor in real life. I want to be a little bit weirder because I'm kind of a weird guy, and everything I've done has been that everybody compares me to like Ray Romano's material delivered by David Letterman. So I want to be a little bit weird. I want to edge towards emo Phillips just a little bit. I don't want to go all the way there, but I want to be a little bit closer and a little Andy Kaufman-esque and stuff like that. So I'm introducing some more of that stuff. And I know that you've got some things that don't, if you look at them on paper, they don't necessarily fit, but you make them fit. So how did you develop your style, and how did you get where you're at today?
Yeah, so I agree with that statement you made 100%. So when I first started, I was always a setup punchline guy, right? And people maybe didn't like the joke, but they always knew where they were supposed to laugh at the joke, right? Boom, set up, here's the punchline. And then as I started progressing and stuff, I saw different styles, and I'm like, well, that guy's a storyteller and he's great at it. And I go, that's just not my style. I grew up listening to Rodney Dangerfield, obviously one of the best setup punchline guys ever. And he was quick, and it was jokes per minute. But as I started to get more comfortable on stage, then I incorporated some family stuff in there, some more true stuff rather than just a setup punchline. And as you get a family and as you progress, obviously you start making jokes about what and family was what that was. Then I started to dabble a little bit into telling a story where I didn't really have a setup punchline, and it was a little bit difficult for me because I didn't know how to do it. And I'm like, but I need to have more laughs. And as I started to work it out on stage a little bit, I'm like, oh, this actually works. Like, I can do this. I just need to work a little bit harder at it. And I go, well, where's it going to fit in my set? I don't know. My whole set is set up punchline. Where do I put it? And I think it's just working it out on stage and finding the right spot for it to get those things to work. So, I could tell a couple of really quick jokes up front, but then I can maybe do a little bit of a story. But then I always get back to the really quick 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2 stuff. And then I finish most of my sets with family stuff just because it's the most personal to me. And and people who have families, they really identify with it. I think I've gotten more compliments after my sets about, people come up to me like, I love when you talk about your family, and it's probably not the strongest stuff in my set, but it's definitely the stuff that appeals to people and they can identify with a lot more. So it was really, to answer your question, it was a learning phase for me. It was a try to figure it out and see where it works and make it work. But I do like the mix up that I have of different approaches. I have some misdirections and all that stuff. I try to do some audience interaction too. Fortunately, I've hosted at Zanies for months at a time, and you really start to hone your MC skills and your audience interaction skills when you get to do stuff like that. So I try to put a little bit of that in every show as well.
And that kind of takes me to, this album's a few years old now. I think Dibs came out in 2016, but I thought it was interesting that so some of your jokes, frankly, are a slow burn. They are something that it doesn't just pop and you laugh right away. You got to think about it a little bit. There's a little bit of thinky time there, and I enjoy that because you had an audience there that you didn't have what I would call a stacked audience, which means 100% Brian Hicks fans, and
definitely not.
They were getting to know you as you were recording the album, and you called that out a few times. You're like, "Hey, this is the type of comedian I am," and and I really enjoyed that because that's different. Because a lot of albums, frankly, have that stacked audience and or canned laughter or whatever, and they don't need to do that, and you had enough nerve and you put yourself out there enough that you did that, and I think that made the album better because of it.
Yeah, in fact, when I recorded, I don't remember inviting anybody out to the show. I invited the guy who was recording the album, obviously, but I always wanted it to be a true audience. I just, I mean, anybody, whether they're a comedian or not, you can invite 100 of your friends out somewhere and tell some jokes, and they're going to laugh. So that really wasn't what I wanted. I definitely wanted a true nightclub feel. I talk about Rodney Dangerfield, and he was incredible, but I listened to like a lot of his earlier stuff where it was a nightclub, and you can tell by the sound, there's 40 people in their tops, It wasn't the Rodney that we all know and love. He was figuring himself out as well. And I just like the sound of that real crowd, and not canned laughter or anything. You just get the real, whatever was going on that moment, that night. That was really what you heard on the album.
Yeah. And it was very refreshing because you just didn't get these gales of laughter at something that
I would have wanted them, but I didn't get them.
Yeah, but it felt like real comedy. I guess as a comedian listening to another comedian, it feels more like real life. And you're in a set, if you don't lose the audience a couple times, then you're probably not breathing, or you're a robot or something like that. And if you are able to bring them back like you did in that particular album, it was really good. And I thought one thing I noticed, so getting into the Dry Bar special now, one of the bits that you did on Dibs, you did on Dry Bar, and you made a subtle change to it. And I wrote down that change. I can't remember what it is. It has something to do with your daughter. Your son was a good one, and your daughter was kind of the rebel. And she wrote something on the wall, and something about when she graduate class 2028 or something like that, and you changed it from I was proud that she was able to do that math to it couldn't have been my son because there's no way he can do that math. And it was funnier on the Dry Bar because you changed that one little thing.
Yeah. So, and those are things that you work out, and what I do with my bits is if I have something and I feel it's, I know it's a good bit and I know it's funny, but I'll always, mostly driving to and from gigs, I'll be thinking about it, and I'll be like, can I change a word? Can I flip this a little bit? Can I maybe say this at the end instead of in the middle? And will it help work? So then I just experiment with it. And I think in that couple years in between those two tapings, I figured out a better way to make that joke work. And I do that a lot with some of my jokes. In fact, a gentleman who just saw me perform, he had seen my dry bar, and he's like, listen, I really liked it. And then I had worked with him for the first time, and I did a joke, and I changed just one word. And it was really an insignificant word. It didn't have anything to do with the punchline, but I thought it appealed to the audience a little bit better. And he came up to me after the show, and he said, hey, I noticed that joke. You changed it from pool to darts. And I said, yeah. And I was like, wow, you noticed that? It wasn't even for a laugh or anything, but I go, this was the first time I ever changed it, because as I was driving here, I thought that I say pool, and I think people get confused because you could shoot pool, you can go swimming in a pool. So I changed it to darts because I thought that was just an easier transition for people to, and that was the only reason I did it. But I'm always working on things like that just to get a better understanding and maybe help people understand, because it's difficult. You're up there and you're trying to paint a picture to people. So you want to make it as easy as you can. But it's not always that easy.
Right. And I think darts is funnier than pool. I don't know the joke, but I darts, it just has more impact to me. And I like that. So thinking about when you are working stuff out, obviously you have to, the only way you know if something works is when you're on stage. And say you're headlining at a club in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, or something like that, and you're doing 3 shows over a weekend, and you want to work some new stuff out, but you still want to make sure the audience walks away happy. And what percentage, say you've got 20 minutes of new stuff that you want to work out, or you've got 20 minutes of rework stuff that you want to work out, and you are going to do an hour, you're going to do 45 minutes 3 times that week. What percentage of time would you slip in that new stuff and still be able to bring the audience back and they walk away happy?
Yeah. So what I do is, the way I think about it, the club is always going to come first in that situation. They booked me to come there to headline, to entertain an audience, right? So if it's a huge crowd, then I really stay away from most of the new stuff unless they're really hot. And I'm like, let me just try this out and see. I'll certainly get back on track. But if it's a little smaller crowd or a little looser crowd, then I'll tend to mess around a little bit more and see if I can work some stuff out. But I have the mindset to know that it's really still always about them. And if I feel like they're not having the experience that they deserve or paid for because I'm trying out new stuff, then I switch gears and I make sure that they have a good time. I mean, that's always first and foremost in my mind.
Right. And as far as crowd work goes, you seem to me to be a genuinely curious person, that you just want to learn about people and meet new people and have new experiences. Do you find that helps in crowd work?
I think it does. I've heard comedians go, they're going to go up and do a 10-minute set, and they're going to be like, hey, should I do some crowd work? I'm like, that's not a question you ask. It's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. You can't just purposely go out and do like, I'm going to do 10 minutes of crowd work. So typically it'll be some of the jokes that I have. I like to do a little bit of crowd work because they always lead into the joke. But as I'm asking them questions, it could take a right turn and I could learn something and go that way. But typically anytime I go to the audience and ask them a question, it's because I'm trying to get to my joke, but I definitely love learning about them because, you've been on stage enough to know if you can get a laugh in the moment like that, a riff, or then it brings the whole audience experience together. They're there live when it happens. Like everybody's in the room. That's the first time that has ever happened. So everybody definitely feels more engaged.
Yeah. I want to go back to dry bar because I've probably talked to 7 or 8 people that have done a dry bar, and they're in various stages of either getting it released or it's been released. And I really, I think what they're doing at Dry Bar is really cool for both you and them, but it's a very interesting situation because if you took your act from the Dibs album and you did on Dry Bar, they would cut probably 33% of it out. Simply because of rules and regulations. You know, you can't dish your wife too much. You can't talk about alcohol. You can't. I mean, there's a very strict list of rules. However, they, from what I hear, they treat you pretty good, and
they treat you great. They really do.
Right. And you're performing in front of a group of people that don't have any drinks in hand. They don't even have a caffeinated beverage. It's really on you to do well. And I watched it and you did well. And I really think that it's kind of almost changing the face of comedy a little bit. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think they definitely have a great platform. They've come up with a great concept to be able to, to fly comics out there for one day. I mean, I went out on a Friday. I recorded 2 sets. Saturday they had two different shows, so they had another 3 different comics on their Saturday recording sets. You get an unbelievable video out of it. The quality of the sound and the visual is great. So just for that reason, I would have probably done it anyway, just to have that. But then they paid you on top of it. And then they have definitely a higher fan base and a platform to be able to push that stuff out to get a lot of more followers and stuff, which it was quite a boost when they started releasing the clips on I wake up one morning and I got 15 new followers on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, what is this? What is this, spam? Somebody spamming? And then because I didn't know that they released anything, and then I log in and then I see and I go, oh, that makes sense now.
Right.
So I think it definitely is changing the way a lot of different outlets are kind of releasing stuff like that, but they really did a pretty good job of jumping on it early and getting it out there. And they got quite a name and a following for themselves now.
Yeah, I am continually astounded by what they put out, and they they get they get folks that are more household names. Like one of my favorites is Bob Zaney, and in the Midwest, if you don't know who Bob Zaney is and you've never been to a comedy club and you've never listened to like Bob and Tom or anything, you've been under a rock. And they did him, and and then they do some lesser known folks too, just because they're funny. And I know that's got to be a springboard for them to be able to get more work. And I don't want to get preachy here, but I am totally for alt comedy, and I'm totally for getting as dirty as you can get and still be funny and being edgy and being political and all that kind of stuff. But I totally understand the fact that they created this as a safe space for their audience.
Yeah.
And then by doing that, they've reached a bigger audience of people who just want to laugh.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I'm like you, I'm a fan of all comedy. Bill Burr is probably one of my favorite comedian right now. And, other than him and Chappelle, they touch on some of the most sensitive topics ever, but they make them incredibly funny.
Right.
But Dry Bar that's not what their audience is. Their audience wants to be able to go there and not worry about touching on something that's a little crazy like that, Yeah. And I give them credit for that. I'm a fan of the other style as well. But their audience, they know what they want. They know what they want to provide for them. So, kudos for that. I mean, they've really built an empire on that.
Yeah. And there's like this clean comedy renaissance happening. I think Gaffigan kind of started it, and Bargatze's really leaning into it. And the funny thing is I've been to 2 Bargatze shows, and when you look at the audience makeup, it's everything from, like 12-year-old kids all the way up to my age biker dudes, because it's funny. And that's really what comedy is all about, is just being funny. And I think that, I really have to applaud Drive By for what they're doing, because it's, you got some great video out of it. You got some great sound clips out of it, and you did a day's work and you got paid for it.
Yeah, I agree. It's really incredible, and it's definitely a boost to be able to throw that, a clip on the website and be able to put that in any kind of promo or anything you're sending out. Bookers will look at stuff like that too, and they'll definitely help if you're trying to get into someplace new. Bookers have they get 100 emails a day of people looking to come and work their club, so they got to choose out of that and figure out who they want to represent their venue. So anything you can have that you can put out there, that'll help. And they do do an incredible job with it, just editing and everything. It's only going to help matters,
Right, no doubt. So, obviously when you started comedy, you were, you didn't have a family to worry about, and now you do, and I mean, you do that joke where your wife texts you and says, I hope all your dates get canceled and you have to come home. And how are you able to balance that as a family man and somebody who wants to get out there and get the work done too?
Yeah. So having a supportive wife is really huge. She's been incredible. When we first met, I was single, so we met through comedy, and obviously we got married and we have 3 children now, and it wasn't always easy, but as I alluded to earlier, being in the Midwest, there were quite a few opportunities to be able to work and then still come home at night.
Right.
And honestly, when the babies were younger, the schedules kind of worked out, because I would be coming home at 1 o'clock in the morning and the kids would be getting up to be fed. So then I would do that thing and my wife would continue sleeping because she would up in the morning. So oddly it works from a comedian standpoint, which usually doesn't, because there's nothing normal about a comedian's schedule or work-life balance, but it worked out. And being in the Midwest definitely helped by, I also called in a couple of favors, establishing those relationships with people. So as my wife was pregnant and getting close to giving birth, I would, hey, can I do this month here at this local, venue? That way I knew I was close to home, and if there was an emergency, I could easily, run out and stuff. So I was very fortunate, and a lot of people helped me out through, well, I have a set of twins, so that was one pregnancy, and obviously my older daughter. So
yeah, that's the whole family thing. I obviously started late in life. I started when I was 52, but if I think about doing it when the kids were young, and I can't even imagine it, because my wife and I have been, because of this move, we've been separated for up to 3 weeks at a time, and it's the most time we've spent apart since we started dating. And it's not like weird, but it's just it's bad. It's like we miss each other, and it's tough to go through that. But I mean, it's getting better, obviously, because I'll see her as of this weekend forever. But that whole traveling schedule and stuff like that. But the hard part is I've talked to a lot of LA and New York comics, and what they have to do to be able to afford to stay in LA and New York is come to the Midwest and do shows.
Well, and why I think that is too, is because I'm not so sure LA, but I think New York, most of them are showcase rooms, right? So they go up and they do a 20-minute set and they get paid X amount of dollars. Where you come to the Midwest, it's still a 3-man show. It's a host and a feature and a headliner, and a headliner's doing 45 minutes to an hour, and they're getting paid accordingly. And
Yeah.
I don't know if they have that at all the clubs. I know most of them don't on both the coasts. But yeah, I mean, if you want to work as a comedian, the Midwest is where it's at. But with I think the longest period of time I've ever had to be away from my family was 6 days. And it was like at that sixth day, I mean, I was like, I gotta get home.
Yeah.
I'm like, it was driving me crazy. And I know there are other comedians who they're 2 and 3 weeks on the road. They're not working the whole time, but in order to connect something together, they go here for 4 days, put themselves up for a couple days, then they go down here or whatever. Unfortunately, I haven't had to do that in 6 days. I went on tour with Michael Carbonaro from the Carbonaro Effect, and we did a 6-city tour. Started in South Bend, Indiana, and then we went down to Florida for 4 days, ended up in North Carolina. And it was a great experience, but at the same time, you miss your family. And if you don't have a family, I could see it's probably a lot easier to do. But once you do have a family, it's tough.
Yeah, for sure. So thinking about favorite clubs, because you've been around the Midwest quite a bit, other than Zanies, let's take Zanies out of it. What are some of the favorite clubs that you've done through the Midwest?
Yeah, so I would have to say there's an Improv that's in Schaumburg outside of Chicago. I don't even know if it's a club. It's a venue. It's a 500-seater, and it doesn't feel like a club. It feels like a bigger stage. That's a beautiful club. I've done a lot of the Funny Bones and stuff across the Midwest. They're all wonderful clubs. Dr. Grins in Grand Rapids, great club. I remember I haven't done it in a while, but the comedy club on State in Madison, Wisconsin was always just an incredible. They always just get the best crowds and everything.
Yeah. Have you ever done the Comedy Attic in Bloomington?
I might have done a showcase there one time passing through, but I've never been booked there for a week.
It's a very similar setup to Dr. Grins, and Dr. Grins hasn't reopened yet, and I hope they do, because I did their funniest person in Grand Rapids contest right before the pandemic, and I really, really enjoyed that stage. And it was the first time that I ever worked in a comedy club that was like completely set up to be a comedy club. And the Comedy Attic's a lot like that too. I know it's the favorite of a lot of big folks to work out their material. I know Marin goes there, and I think Chappelle goes there and stuff. And it's a really cool venue. And both my kids went to IU, so I got to see a few things there. So yeah, it's really cool. So thinking about being where you're at with the Dry Bar special, and we're out of the pandemic now, and one of the things I know is comedy clubs are hopping right now because everybody wants to get out. How do you feel that is going to? Do you think that's gonna keep at the same pace, or is it going to start to go back to normal, or how do you feel the whole comedy scene is going to be?
So I have I think people are really appreciating being able to go out and enjoy comedy. I also think that some people are going out and overindulging a little bit because they haven't been out in so long.
Yes.
So they don't know how to behave anymore. I hope that definitely settles down a little bit. But I think that there's definitely going to be a genuine gratefulness for live comedy, live shows of anything. I mean, people were locked down for so long, and you couldn't go to your friend's house, let alone go out and enjoy any kind of live theater or anything like that. So I definitely think there's going to be a little bit of a boom. And from what I've seen in Chicago, like a lot of the younger comics are, they're out there and they're hitting as many mics as they can every single night. They post them, whether they're paid shows or not. If they're getting up on stage, they want people to know about it. So they're throwing all that out there. So I definitely, I think there would be a little bit of a a boom, I guess, if you will, or an appeal to get back out to clubs and do things that people enjoy doing. Live comedy, there's nothing that could be said. You don't get it from watching it on TV or Netflix. Nope. For sure. When you're in the club and you feel the energy and everything, from the comedian standpoint and the audience's standpoint, there's really nothing like it. If it's a good show. If it's a bad show, there's also nothing like it.
Yeah. I just noticed on this stupid camera, I look like I'm looking off to my side all the time when I'm looking at you. So I can't change that. So
no, you're fine.
Whatever. Yeah. Also, the lighting's terrible. I look as old as I am. So that kind of stinks. So one of the things I do like to ask folks that is kind of a stock question, because you've been in the business long enough. What are 3 things that you know now that you wish you would have known when you started?
All right. So 3 things. So I was fortunate enough, I mentioned to you that I worked at a comedy club, right? Before I became a comedian, which I think was very helpful to me and was also some things that I passed along to other people. Because I know how, when they were coming to the club I worked at, I know how I wanted to be treated. I was a door guy, right? But these were celebrities coming in here. So I didn't want them to ignore me. I didn't want to wait on them hand and foot. I would have, but I didn't want to do that. So I think respecting the wait staff and just respecting the club itself is huge. I probably, more than I can count clubs where a comedian, even a headliner, would go up there and start making fun of the club, and it'd get big laughs and everything. But I'd look over at the owner, and the owner's like, why are you doing this? You don't have an act? Do your act. Don't rip on my plants over here or the wall or whatever. I go, do your act, So that's probably one thing. Don't rip on things. The other thing is, those people who you meet as you do frequent these clubs, they may be booking that club in 3 years. So, if you disrespect them now, don't expect to get booked by them in 3 years. I've seen a lot of that kind of happen as the years go on. So I think if you just have the general rule of thumb, just be nice to everybody, then you should be doing all right. I think the last thing is a piece of advice that somebody gave me when I started, and I really held it to heart, is, everybody wants to progress. You want to host shows, but then you want to jump to the feature spot because, it's a better spot and you get paid a little bit more money, you get more time, and that's great. And obviously you move to headliner, but he told me, he said, you start out as an MC, a host of a show, and then obviously you move up to a feature act or opener, and then you move on to headlining shows, and then where do you go from there? And ultimately, maybe you get your own TV show, and guess what? You're hosting shows again. You know what I mean? You're doing the Tonight Show. You're the host again. So learn those hosting skills. They're second to none, because even if you're not hosting a show or you don't think you're going into it to be a host, many times you do these one-nighters, you go in, you're the host of the show. You're doing 30 minutes, but you need to start the show and you need to get them engaged to be able to listen to the show. So that's definitely a piece of advice that I tell people now. So I headline all over. I feature still to this day, and I'll be hosting a whole month out at Zany's in Rosemont in August. One, because it helps me work on new material, and I don't feel that pressure of being in the headliner spot and having to make these people, having to bring it home every night. I could throw in new jokes and work them out. And then 2, audience participation, and don't ever. Having the ability to host a show, you'll always have work, whether you're a comedian or not. I can go and host an auction event right now if I wanted to, just because I have those skills,
Yeah. And that's great. It's funny, kind of a callback to the Improv in Schaumburg. I went there and saw a show, and I won't tell you which 3 comedians were there, but I don't know if it was the audience or if it was the comedians. And it's a 500-seater, and there's probably 150 tickets sold. It was on a holiday weekend, and everybody bombed. And one thing that new comedians don't understand is it doesn't matter how nice the club is, or it doesn't matter who the audience is, you're going to bomb sometimes. And the chemistry just isn't there. And no matter how good the joke is, it just ain't going to work.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done the same sets, an early show and a late show, and I had a meeting out of my hand the early show, and then 100 new people come in for the late show, and I do that same set, and they're staring at me like these are brand new jokes and I've never done them before. And I'm like, how did all these people, like, how did you not get mixed up with even half the crowd from the early show? How is that 100 people in that show and this 100 people in this show? And I mean, that just goes to tell you that it's a vibe, it's an energy in the room. It could be anything. It could be me, it could be them, but it's definitely, for it to work, it all has to be, on the same page, and it all has to be together.
Right. So obviously you've got things coming up. The Dry Bar special is out. And first of all, how can people find your Dry Bar special?
So if they go to my website, which is funnybrianhicks.com, in my bio page, I have a snapshot of my Dry Bar special, and there's a little link right there that'll take you right to the special. So then I have to search around for it.
And it's always good to watch the whole thing and put a little heart by all the different segments.
Absolutely, yeah. That's very important to me, because I go through and I count all those hearts every night before I go to bed.
And so does Dry Bar.
I'm sure they do.
That's a metric. They like their metrics. So, and what else do you have going on? Shows and things like that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm doing a theater out in Bryan, Ohio this Saturday. As I mentioned, I'm hosting the whole month of August out in Zanies in Rosemont. I've got some confirmation on some Michael Carbonaro dates coming up for the fall. Those are obviously the bigger theaters and stuff. And these are some shows that have been postponed from obviously 2020 and then even early 2021. So I think that we're going to be getting back to doing those tours, which is great. That's just for a kid who was standing in the back of a comedy club, telling people I would never go up there. That's ridiculous. There's 50 people that could yell anything at any time. To be able to open these shows at these 2,000, 3,000 seat theaters for this guy who's been very grateful or gracious to let me do it is unbelievable. It's a great experience. It's definitely doing a club,
And Carbonaro, I mean, obviously he's unique, but he's also timeless. He can do, 20 years from now, his stuff will still be relevant.
He's incredibly funny too, and I don't think he gets credit for that on his TV show because he has to play the straight character, but his live show, I mean, he's as quick as any comedian I've ever worked with, and he'll go off the side a little bit. He won't stick to the script all the time. If there's something that pops into his head, he throws it out there. So it's really an incredible, and it's an all ages show, family show, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah. That's cool. So final thing, one thing that you would tell a new comedian right after you saw him do a pretty good 5 minutes, what would you tell them to give them some advice?
Yeah. So anytime I see somebody do well, I always say, great job. That's what I wanted to hear when I was coming up. And, if you did a good job, you pretty much know. But there were many times where I was like, wow, that was a great set. And then I would listen to the recording on the way home and I'm like, that was horrible.
Yeah.
It sounds different live than it does on tape. And as you mentioned it earlier in the interview, you hate listening to yourself talk.
Yeah.
And I do too. But I record every single set that I do. Yeah. And I think that's vital. It's important to hear those little things that work and the little things that don't work. You know what your joke is. You know what you want to say, but maybe there's a timing. Maybe there's an inflection in your voice that you do it differently. Maybe there's a pause. Those are all things that I think you really learn from to be able to put the joke together and make it work well. The last thing is just get up on stage as often as you can. Cause I don't think I was, there's still times I get on stage, I'm not 100% comfortable, but a lot of times I get up there and I'm pretty comfortable. And this is 20 years later, so if I'm 5 years in, I'm not comfortable yet. I know I'm not.
Yeah, no doubt.
I might think I'm comfortable, but I'm not comfortable yet.
And the funny thing about recording yourself, there's some nuances there. You can tell when the audience is the whole energy is just sucked out of the room because you said something wrong, and it's not audible, but it's almost like it's more than silence. It's like silence times 2,
sure,
and
it's reverse.
you really know when it's screwed up. Well, Brian, I got to say, it's really been great talking to you. And it's nice to talk to the guy that Michael Palisak likes so much.
Yeah, well, I admire Mike very highly. He's not only one of the funniest guys working today, but he's one of the most genuine people I've ever met.
He is, yeah.
You can't get Mike to say a bad word about anybody, and I try. I always try. I say something bad, but he won't do it, and I respect him for that. But thanks for having me. This is awesome. If there's one thing I enjoy is talking comedy, no matter who. I think that's part of the allure for me for doing comedy, is to hang out after the show and be able to, talk with people who have things in common with me and stuff. So I appreciate you having me on.
Right, and thank you for being on. I learned a lot, and that's what this whole thing's about. I learn, and then the people that listen and learn, and everybody's happy.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Brian.
Yeah, thank you so much.